So today we're going to have a little demonstration of the art of limning. I suppose it probably started with early manuscripts, but ultimately what we know of as limning, which is painting miniatures, really hit the heights in the Elizabethan period. And some of the greatest exponents of that would be artists like Hilliard and Cooper and Oliver. The most famous of these is without doubt Nicholas Hilliard. He was part of the court of Queen Elizabeth. He worked very much as a gentleman. He was an unusual artist in that he was quite keen to be seen as a gentleman and not as a tradesperson. So he wrote a wonderful book called the Treatise Concerning the Art of Limning, and within that he happily describes how artists should be well dressed in their finery, they should wear silk, and he gives you quite a lot of other valuable information. Unfortunately, he doesn't tell you how to paint if your eyesight's going, and I can only assume that he would have used magnifiers, they were readily available, and he would have used the daylight. Well, we know that he used the daylight. He was very keen to go outside, and we know that he painted Queen Elizabeth I several times, and on each occasion he, as he says in the treatise, he used daylight so that we didn't have any shadows and things like that. Interestingly, most of his gentlemen and ladies tend to be quite pale, and they aren't very... They are very detailed, but they are not that sort of realistic look that you might get, would tend to get anyway with the later ones of Samuel Cooper. They put a lot more shade into the work, and so the whole thing had a more natural look to it. But Hilliards very much have a style, and we're going to look at that, and we're going to copy it and explore it. The portraits, and this was from Tudor times right up to Elizabethan times and later, were predominantly painted on vellum. Vellum is actually made from calf skin. It can be made from other things, other animals as well, goat skin, all sorts of things, but it was sort of stretched and bleached and left to dry after various processes of scraping it to get rid of all the hairs, and ultimately you get this very thin card. Parchment is very similar. Parchment is made from sheepskin. So, they're very similar but a little bit different. Vellum has one side which is the smoothest side, and that is the one that you paint on. And actually, Nicholas Hilliard wanted or recommended that you paint on the vellum from an aborted calf because they were hairless, and so you got the best skin from that. Vellum is readily available still this day and age, and when you go and buy vellum, you'll often think you're buying vellum, but it isn't. It'll just be paper called vellum, but genuine, real vellum is quite expensive. This little piece of paper here, as you can see, and it's got actually the other side which I've covered up to protect it, so I'm doing a double portrait, but for now this one, that was I think about £11.50. So it's quite expensive for a very small little piece. They would paint on the vellum, which actually would be finer than the example I've got here, and then they would stick that to a playing card. So when people started taking these beautiful miniatures apart, they'd see that on the back of it would be the ace of spades or the five of diamonds. But it was a good way of getting it onto a nice stiff surface ready to paint. The paints that the artists use would have been natural pigments, and these would have been ground down and then mixed with gum arabic, which is pretty much the way our watercolours are mixed nowadays. The brushes would be very, very fine. There would be squirrel hair. I've got a nice little miniature paintbrush here. This is specifically for miniatures. I'm not terribly sure how good a quality it is. I've also got my regular paintbrushes here, and we'll see these should be a better quality, but whether they be small enough to paint on this surface, I'm not terribly sure. It's very, very tiny. So I have prepared the drawing. I am basing the entire portrait on a Hilliard miniature of a unidentified young man. He's very intense, and he stares out at you with his green eyes, and behind him is a background of flames, all of which are painted over with pure gold, which would be burnished with a dog's tooth or something like that later. The foreground is incredibly painted. His shirt is highly detailed. And again, as I say, it's opaque. You can clearly see how he has painted the white onto the darker background. There's a lot of detail with the necklace and with the jewellery, the earring, extraordinary detail, bearing in mind the size and scale of it. So if I stick my hand here, now the portrait that I'm doing, as I say, is the same size as this particular Hilliard, and this particular Hilliard at 7 centimetres high is a large one. Most of them were smaller than that, could be 4 centimetres as an average perhaps. So that gives you an idea of the scale we're looking at. But I thought, well, I shall just lose my sight if I try and do it any smaller than that. So particularly as I'm copying this particular one, it seemed right that I should be copying it the same size as it actually is. However, I'm not actually going to be doing the unknown young man with his sexy look. The portrait here, the face is not that of the young man. It is actually of Matthew Goode, the actor. Now the reason I put that in is that these particular portraits are mentioned in a book. It's a trilogy by Deborah Harkness, Discovery of Witches, being the first book. And that was televised recently, and I totally fell in love with the book as I read it, and I totally fell in love with the television programme. And I was very keen then to read book 2 and book 3, which I quickly did. And book 2 takes the couple back in time to the Elizabethan age, and they do indeed at that some point in the book, without giving too much away, meet Hilliard, and he paints their portraits. And I thought, well, now that would be rather wonderful if I painted them. I then discovered that Deborah Harkness actually knew which portraits she was basing this idea on, and they were the portrait of the unknown young man and another one, which we'll talk about later, of the young lady. And so I thought, let us then put into reality what she saw in her head. And only this time, the film reality. So we've got Matthew Goode as he would appear as a portrait of an unknown young man. So the first wash that was applied was a basic flesh tone. It was called the Carnation. Obviously I suppose it must have come from the idea of it being carnation pink, but it doesn't really resemble the colour carnation. If we have a little look at this picture now, you can see that it's much more of a proper flesh tone, quite a warm colour. I'm going to be using these Holbein Artist Gouache. I like Holbein paints. These are the ones that I use. They're my paint of choice for watercolour. I don't normally use gouache, but on this occasion I'm going to, because I think I want the opacity, and I'm not convinced it's going to work without opacity. So I'm just mixing up a nice thick colour here. Unfortunately the colour is going to be distorted because it all, with the light, has become quite yellow. So there's the colour, so you can see it's kind of a lovely rusty brown that I've mixed. And now I'm going to add quite a lot of white and quite a lot of water to make our carnation. Once you've applied your layer of carnation, then you can start applying a outline. So I'm now going to apply carnation. It's a little wet actually, probably could do with being a little bit less wet than that. Oh, that's dark, isn't it? That's the trouble with painting like this. I actually can't see three-dimensionally. So you end up hitting the paper, oops daisy, long before you intend to. I'm going to take the magnifier away and just try and paint using my own eyes for the minute, because this is just going to go horribly wrong. I can see it's not working the way I want it to at all. Okay. Intriguing, it seems to be picking up quite a lot of the texture. Okay, having applied the wash, the carnation, I'm now going to start going around the outline of the various forms. Now, I think, to be fair, I've become very heavy-handed here with the pencil. I don't think that Hilliard would have done anywhere near as heavy a line as this. So I'm going to be quite careful. Having said that, he was working with opaque colours, so hopefully I'll be able to get away with the fact that I've been a tad heavy-handed. Now, having gone from heavy-handed, I'm going to have to go the exact opposite and be very, very delicate. Keeping an eye on the way he painted too, and the lines that he has in the original painting, and how he's applied them. I'm also trying desperately to capture a likeness without losing, so I'm just blocking that in there just to get rid of the excess paint, without losing the outline. Gracious me, it's hard work. But this is easier than I was applying the paint before, because before I was trying to do it foolishly with a microscope, which is all very well, but it meant that I lost any sense of 3-dimension. And once I'd lost that, then I had absolutely no idea where I was going with it. I'll be perfectly honest, this is going to give me the most wretched of headaches, I think. Hilliard didn't die young, so surely he must have started losing his sight at some point and thought, well, let's paint a bit bigger. Apparently not. I don't know how he managed it, to be honest. You'll also see I protected the other side of the page. Because it is vellum, just using watercolour paper, it really doesn't matter, but with vellum it does need to be protected. And you can see the outline is gradually forming and becoming a little clearer. I'm trying to copy this wretched man's face, but I mean, unfortunately, the actor, one of those people who changes his look depending on the day, not deliberately. The photographs that are taken, they, depending on the angle, they will completely transform what he looks like. So I'm using about 6 different photographs to create this one. And in every single one, he looks like a different person. The one that I'm actually sort of based most of this on, I could say would probably be the least like him. But having said that, it's quite important that I'm copying the same angle as Hilliard, and so I have no choice at all on this. So it's a bit of a beast. But his eyebrows, goodness me, why don't they have, they don't conform. They really don't. The other issue that I have here is, and it's rather glorious and also rather appalling, the the lamps that I'm using here, which are lovely, are giving off a tremendous amount of heat. Now, I like heat. I'm one of those people that really likes heat. But the problem with it is it dries the paint almost the second it touches the paper. So my paintbrush is kind of drying before I even get there. She's very hard. Right, well that's pretty good. Yeah, I can see where I'm going to go with this. Obviously a lot of work to go. But I'm going to stop there. I'm going to pull down the, pick up the thing so you can maybe see it better. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to see it. But I think that's about the same angle as the camera, so I don't think it's too much distortion there. Unfortunately, if I go in closer, you just can't see the very, very fine detail, which is a shame. I'll put it away. Hopefully, the camera will pick up enough detail that it will be magnified on the screen. Okay, so that's as far as we go now. And part 2 to follow.